In the heart of New Haven, nestled between the rising skyline and winding rivers, lived Johnson Parker. At 46, Johnson wasn't a man of wealth or luxury, but he had built a life grounded in hard work and an unwavering sense of duty. A mechanic by trade, Johnson had earned a reputation over the years for his reliability and his willingness to help others, even if it meant putting his own comfort aside. His shop, Parker's Repairs, sat on the edge of town. Its faded exterior, worn from years of service, stood as a testament to the countless lives he had quietly impacted. It wasn't extravagant, but it was home. Johnson found pride in the simplicity of his trade, knowing that every bolt tightened and engine fixed was a small way to make someone's life easier. As the cold winter winds swept through New Haven, the chill seemed to cut deeper when you were alone. Johnson often found solace in his small garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of motor oil and grease, a refuge after long days of work. This Christmas Eve, however, was different. A chance encounter would soon remind him that even in the humblest acts of kindness, lives could be changed forever. Johnson Parker had no family of his own, but his younger sister Emily and her 2 children, Mark and Ella, were his anchor. They were his family, his connection to something larger than himself. Their love filled a quiet void in his life, grounding him in ways he often didn't acknowledge. Still, Johnson's solitary existence was something he had grown used to. Socializing wasn't his strong suit, and he rarely made time for it. Tonight, though, was supposed to be different. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years, Johnson had promised Emily he would join her for the holiday dinner. "You've got to come, John," Emily had insisted in her no-nonsense way. "The kids miss you, and so do I." Johnson had nearly argued, but deep down, he knew she was right. It had been far too long since he spent a Christmas with his family. As he prepared to close the shop for the night, his thoughts drifted to Emily's warm kitchen, the aroma of roast turkey and cinnamon rolls, and the laughter of Mark and Ella as they tore through their presents. He hadn't allowed himself to dwell on these things for years, burying his longing beneath work and routine. But now, the idea of sitting at their table surrounded by love and warmth stirred something within him. Tonight wasn't just a promise to Emily, it was a promise to himself, a chance to reconnect with what truly mattered. As the clock neared 6:30 p.m., Johnson wiped his hands on a rag, finishing the last repair of the day. The engine hummed softly, the final tire fixed. Glancing at the clock, he grabbed his coat and keys, eager to leave and make it to Emily's for Christmas dinner. Outside, snow had begun to fall, blanketing the world in white as the evening sky darkened. Just as he reached for the light switch to close the garage, the old phone on the wall rang, sharp and insistent. Johnson froze. The phone rarely rang this late, especially on Christmas Eve. For a moment he considered ignoring it. Whoever it was could wait. After all, he had plans, and Emily's warm kitchen and laughter-filled evening were calling to him. But the ringing persisted. With a sigh, he walked back and picked up the receiver. "Parker's Repairs," he said, his voice weary. A brief pause, then a soft, frantic voice spoke. "Hello, is this the mechanic shop?" Johnson's tired tone softened. "Yes, this is Johnson Parker. How can I help you?" I'm so sorry to call so late," the woman stammered. "But I've broken down. I don't know what to do. I'm on Highway 13 just outside town. I've been trying to start my car for over an hour, but it won't budge. And the snow, it's getting worse." Johnson sighed, glancing at his coat. Duty called once again. Johnson frowned, his mind racing to assess the situation. Highway 13 was a desolate stretch, especially at night. The snowstorm had intensified, and temperatures were plummeting. He glanced out the window at the swirling snow, and then at the clock. Emily's dinner table seemed so close, a warm, lively evening he hadn't enjoyed in years. But the thought of leaving a pregnant woman stranded in the storm tugged at his conscience. "I'll be there," he said firmly, already pulling on his coat. "Stay in your car, keep the engine off to save fuel, and bundle up. I'm coming to get you." Thank you so much," the woman said, her voice trembling with relief. Johnson hung up, grabbed his toolbox, and stepped outside into the biting cold. Snow was already piling up, blanketing the small town. As he trudged to his old tow truck, a wave of exhaustion swept over him. He had been so looking forward to the warmth of Emily's home. The noise, the bustle of Christmas cheer. For a fleeting moment he saw it in his mind's eye. The table laden with food, the kids giggling as they tore through their presents, and Emily's knowing smile. His chest tightened at the thought, but he shook it off. Someone needed him, and that was all that mattered. His truck roared to life with a sputter, and Johnson steered it cautiously down the icy road. The headlights sliced through the dense snowflakes as the wind howled, rattling the truck's frame. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, navigating the slippery streets toward Highway 30. The drive felt endless, the storm worsening with every passing minute. But then, finally, his headlights illuminated a car half buried in snow near mile marker 12. Relief washed over him as he pulled up behind it, leaving the engine running to provide warmth. Johnson climbed out, the wind biting at his exposed skin. Snow crunched under his boots as he approached the stranded vehicle, flashlight in hand. He peered into the car, its windows fogged from the woman's breath. "You all right in there?" he called, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. Inside, the woman jumped at the sound. She rolled the window down just enough to speak, her face pale and tense. "Yes, I think so," she said, her breath visible in the frigid air. "Just really cold." "Don't worry," Johnson said warmly, his voice steady. "Let's get you out of here and someplace safe." He extended his hand, his presence a beacon of hope in the storm. She replied, her voice hoarse and trembling. "Stay put," Johnson said, his tone firm but reassuring. "I'll take a look at your engine." The pregnant woman nodded in relief, sinking back into her seat. Johnson pulled his coat tighter as he moved toward the hood of her car, battling against the biting cold. His flashlight illuminated the engine, revealing the problem almost immediately. A dead battery. He returned to her window, rapping gently to catch her attention. "Your battery's dead," he explained. "I'll give you a jump, but you'll need a new one soon." She let out a sharp breath, half grateful and half anxious. "That's fine. I just need to get somewhere warm." "I'll have you running in no time," Johnson replied, already heading to his truck to grab jumper cables. The snow fell relentlessly as Johnson worked, his fingers stiff from the cold but his movements deliberate and practiced. Fixing what was broken was second nature to him, no matter the conditions. After what felt like an eternity, the car's engine finally roared to life. The woman climbed out, her breath visible in the icy air. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "You've saved me tonight." "It's no trouble," Johnson replied with a modest shrug, already walking back to his truck. "Drive carefully, and don't stop unless you have to." She hesitated, watching him for a moment. "You're a good man, Mr. Parker," she said softly. Johnson nodded, his voice steady despite the cold. "Take care now." As her taillights disappeared into the storm, Johnson stood alone in the snow, the wind howling around him. Despite the chill, he felt a quiet warmth, knowing he'd done the right thing. Johnson's chest tightened again, but this time it wasn't from missing his family's dinner. The act of helping her had left a fleeting warmth inside him, a glow that quickly faded as the reality of the cold night settled back in. He glanced at the dashboard clock, 8:10 p.m. The roads were becoming more treacherous, and Emily's dinner table felt farther away than ever. Climbing back into his truck, Johnson started the engine and turned toward home. Snow continued to fall in thick, relentless waves, the headlights barely cutting through the dense curtain. The truck groaned against the storm's relentless grip, the wind howling like distant whispers around him. As he navigated the slippery roads, Johnson's thoughts churned. He replayed the evening's events over and over in his mind. He had helped the pregnant woman without hesitation, guided purely by instinct and a sense of duty. It was the right thing to do. Of that, he was certain. But now, as the storm closed in, a deep loneliness settled in his chest. His promise to Emily and the kids had gone unfulfilled. He had missed the warm embrace of family, the laughter, the joy of being part of something larger than himself. The memory of their smiling faces tugged at him, and while he knew he had made the right choice, a quiet ache lingered in his heart. The hours seemed to stretch as the storm grew heavier. Snowflakes swirled in endless patterns, and Johnson tried to focus on the road ahead. Yet, his mind wandered back to the pregnant woman he had helped. What was her life like? What struggles had she faced before breaking down on that lonely stretch of highway? He had seen the gratitude in her eyes, but had he truly understood her story? As the truck pressed forward through the relentless snow, Johnson couldn't shake the feeling that the night's events had changed him in ways he didn't yet understand. Though the ache in his heart remained, so too did a flicker of something else. Johnson had always been a quiet, reserved man, one who helped others without expecting recognition. Yet tonight, as the weight of the evening pressed on him, he couldn't help but wonder if anyone would ever notice the quiet sacrifices he made. Finally, the familiar lights of New Haven appeared through the storm, a small relief in the overwhelming stillness. Johnson's heart lifted slightly at the thought of the warmth awaiting him at home. It wasn't the warmth of festive decorations or the laughter of loved ones. It was the comfort of his own space, his sanctuary. Still, as he passed the outskirts of town, the ache of missing Emily's dinner table, the cheerful voices of her kids, and the aroma of Christmas ham grew heavier. By the time Johnson pulled into his driveway, the clock read 11:30 p.m. Christmas Eve was nearly over. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world blanketed in a pristine white stillness. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment, the silence of the night pressing down on him. He had done a good deed, he knew that. But as he stepped out of the truck, a deep isolation seemed to seep into his bones. Inside the house, Johnson dropped his keys on the counter and sank onto the worn couch, the silence enveloping him like a heavy fog. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 11:57 p.m., only 3 minutes until Christmas Day. The sharp sting of having missed something important lingered in his chest. He had been so focused on helping the pregnant woman, on doing the right thing, that he hadn't allowed himself to feel the emptiness of the moment. Now, as the clock struck midnight, Johnson let out a long sigh, rubbing the back of his neck. It had been a long, tiring day. Christmas Eve had passed him by in a blur of responsibility and sacrifice, leaving behind a bittersweet ache in its place. The next morning, Johnson woke to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through the window, casting a pale golden hue across the room. The house was silent, save for the faint hum of the furnace as it struggled to keep up with the cold. Memories of the previous night, helping the pregnant woman, the lonely drive home, flooded back. It was Christmas morning, and though Johnson hadn't expected much, he had secretly hoped for some sign of connection. Perhaps a voicemail from Emily or a plate of leftovers on the doorstep. But there was nothing. Rubbing his eyes, Johnson shuffled into the kitchen. The coffee pot sputtered, filling the air with its bitter aroma. He stood by the window, staring out at the snow blanketing the streets like a soft, untouched quilt. Everything outside seemed so still, so peaceful, but inside, the house felt cold and empty, as though it were waiting for something. Then, a sharp, insistent knock at the door broke the silence, making Johnson jump. He frowned, setting his coffee down, and walked to the door. When he opened it, his eyes widened in shock. Standing there was Emily, bundled up in her coat, with Mark and Ella grinning behind her. In one hand she held a steaming casserole dish, the foil glinting in the sunlight. "Merry Christmas, John," Emily said cheerfully, stepping inside as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "What are you all doing here?" Johnson asked, still stunned. Emily breezed past him, the kids trailing eagerly. "What does it look like?" "We're bringing Christmas to you," she said, setting the casserole dish on the counter. Johnson stood frozen, speechless. He had expected nothing, certainly not this. The kids rushed to hug him, and Mark practically shoved a gift into his hands. "Open it," Mark urged, bouncing with excitement. Johnson carefully unwrapped the present to reveal a hand-knitted scarf, slightly uneven and mismatched in shades of deep blue, yet it was beautiful. A lump formed in his throat as he held it up. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Mark hugged him tightly. "We love you, Uncle John." "I love you too, but," Johnson whispered, his voice gruff. For the first time in years, he felt the warmth of family and love wash over him, filling the emptiness. Emily placed a plate of food in front of Johnson. Ham, mashed potatoes, and buttery rolls. "You haven't been eating enough, have you?" she teased gently, her voice warm and filled with care. Johnson gave a faint smile. "I'm doing all right," he replied, his heart swelling with the simple love of his family. The morning passed in joyful chaos. Laughter and conversation filled the small house, blending with the clatter of dishes and the excited chatter of Mark and Ella. For the first time in what felt like years, Johnson experienced a deep, undeniable sense of peace. The scarf remained draped around his neck, a small but powerful reminder of the love he had been missing. As he watched Emily and the kids, their presence lighting up the space, Johnson realized this unexpected gathering was the true gift of Christmas. It wasn't about grand celebrations or expensive gifts. It was about connection, about showing up for each other when it mattered most. When Emily began packing up to leave, she paused at the door and turned back. "You're a good man, John. Don't forget that," she said softly. Johnson smiled, his heart full. "Thanks for bringing Christmas to me," he replied, his voice genuine. As they disappeared into the snowy streets, the house grew quiet again, but it no longer felt empty. Johnson tightened the scarf around his neck, feeling its warmth against the cold. In the days that followed, life returned to its familiar rhythm. The garage was bustling, and customers continued to rely on Johnson's steady hands. Yet inside him, something had shifted. There was a renewed energy, a quiet understanding that even the smallest acts of kindness could ripple out and change lives, his own included. That Christmas Eve had reminded Johnson of what truly mattered: fixing what was broken, offering warmth where it was needed, and showing up when it counted. The pregnant woman he had helped had unknowingly given him the greatest gift, a reminder that life wasn't just about the work you did, but the people you touched along the way. And for Johnson, that was more than enough.